Chapters 7 and 8. "Hello, I'm Larry, your waiter," said Larry, the Baudelaire orphan's waiter. He was a short, skinny man in a goofy clown costume with a name tag pinned to his chest that read Larry. "Welcome to the Anxious Clown restaurant, where everyone has a good time whether they like it or not. I can see we have a whole family lunching together today, so allow me to recommend the extra fun special family appetizer. It's a bunch of things fried up together and served with a sauce." "What a wonderful idea," Captain Sham said, smiling in a way that showed all of his yellow teeth. "An extra fun special family appetizer for an extra fun special family. Mine." "I'll just have water, thank you," Violet said. "Same with me," Klaus said. "And a glass of ice cubes for our baby sister, please." "I'll have a cup of coffee with non-dairy creamer," Mr. Poe said. "Oh, no, Mr. Poe," Captain Sham said. "Let's share a nice big bottle of red wine." "No, thank you, Captain Sham," Mr. Poe said. "I don't like to drink during banking hours." "But this is a celebratory lunch," Captain Sham explained. "We should drink a toast to my three new children. It's not every day that a man becomes a father." "Please, Captain," Mr. Poe said. "It is heartening to see that you are glad to raise the Baudelaires, but you must understand that the children are rather upset about their Aunt Josephine. There is a lizard called a chameleon that you probably know, can change colors instantly to blend into its surroundings. Besides being slimy and cold-blooded, Captain Sham resembled a chameleon in that he was chameleonic, a word which here means able to blend in with any situation. Since Mr. Poe and the Baudelaires had arrived at the Anxious Clown, Captain Sham had been unable to conceal his excitement at having the children almost in his clutches. But now that Mr. Poe had pointed out that the occasion actually called for sadness, Captain Sham instantly began to speak in a mournful voice. "I am upset too," he said, brushing a tear away from beneath his eye patch. "Josephine was one of my oldest and dearest friends." "You met her yesterday," Klaus said, "in the grocery store." "It does only seem like yesterday," Captain Sham said. "But it was really years ago. She and I met in cooking school. We were oven partners in the advanced baking course." "You weren't oven partners," Violet said, disgusted at Captain Sham's lie. "Aunt Josephine would never. Aunt Josephine was desperately afraid of turning on the oven. She never would have attended a cooking school." "We soon became friends," Captain Sham said, going on with his story as if no one had interrupted. "And one day she said to me, 'If I ever adopt some orphans and then meet an untimely death, promise me you will raise them for me.' I told her I would, but of course I never thought I would have to keep my promise." "That's a very sad story," Larry said, and everyone turned to see that the waiter was still standing over them. "I didn't realize this was a sad occasion. In that case, allow me to recommend the cheer-up cheeseburgers. The pickles, mustard, and ketchup make a little smiley face on the top of the burger. This is guaranteed to make you smile, too." "That sounds like a good idea," Captain Sham said. "Bring us all cheer-up cheeseburgers, Larry." "They'll be here in a jiffy," the waiter promised. And at last he was gone. Yes, Mr. Poe said, "but after we've finished our cheeseburgers, Captain Sham, there are some important papers for you to sign. I have them in my briefcase, and after lunch we'll look them over. And then the children will be mine," Captain Sham asked. "Well, you will be caring for them, yes," Mr. Poe said. "Of course, the Baudelaire fortune will still be under my supervision until Violet comes of age." "What fortune?" Captain Sham asked, his eyebrows curling. "I don't know anything about a fortune." "Dunna," Sonny shrieked, which meant something along the lines of course you do." "The Baudelaire parents," Mr. Poe explained, "left an enormous fortune behind, and the children inherit it when Violet comes of age." "Well, I have no interest in a fortune," Captain Sham said. "I have my sailboats. I won't touch a penny of it." "Well, that's good," Mr. Poe said, "because you can't touch a penny of it." "We'll see," Captain Sham said. "What?" Mr. Poe asked. "Here are your cheer-up cheeseburgers," Larry sang out, appearing at their table with a tray full of greasy-looking food. "Enjoy your meal." Like most restaurants filled with neon lights and balloons, the Anxious Clown served terrible food. But the three orphans had not eaten all day and had not eaten anything warm for a long time. So even though they were sad and anxious, they found themselves with quite an appetite. After a few minutes without conversation, Mr. Poe began to tell a very dull story about something that had happened at the bank. Mr. Poe was so busy talking, Klaus and Sonny were so busy pretending to be interested, and Captain Sham was so busy wolfing down his meal that nobody noticed what Violet was up to. When Violet had put on her coat to go out into the wind and the cold, she had felt a lump of something in her pocket. The lump was a bag of peppermints that Mr. Poe had given the Baudelaires the day they had arrived at Lake Lachrymose, and it had given her an idea. As Mr. Poe droned on and on, she carefully took the bag of peppermints out of her coat pocket and opened it. To her dismay, they were the kind of peppermints that are each wrapped in a little bit of cellophane. Placing her hands underneath the table, she unwrapped 3 peppermints, using the utmost. The word utmost, when it is used here, means most. Care not to make any of those crinkling noises that come from unwrapping candy and are so annoying in a movie theater. At last, she had 3 bare peppermints sitting on a napkin in her lap. Without drawing attention to herself, she put one on Klaus's lap and one on Sonny's. When her younger siblings felt something appear in their laps and looked down, they saw the peppermints. They at first thought the eldest Baudelaire had lost her mind, but after a moment they understood. If you are allergic to a thing, it is best not to put that thing in your mouth, particularly if that thing is cats. But Violet, Klaus, and Sonny all knew this was an emergency. They needed time alone to figure out Captain Sham's plan and how to stop it. And although causing allergic reactions is a rather drastic way of getting time by yourself, it was the only thing they could think of. So while neither of the adults at the table were watching, all 3 children put the peppermints in their mouth and waited. The Baudelaire's allergies are famous for being quick-acting, so the orphans did not have to wait long. In a few minutes, Violet began to break out in red, itchy hives. Klaus' tongue started to swell up, and Sonny, who, of course, had never eaten a peppermint, broke out in hives and had her tongue swell up. Mr. Poe finally finished telling his story and then noticed the orphans' condition. "Why, children," he said, "you look terrible. Violet, you have red patches on your skin. Klaus, your tongue is hanging out of your mouth. Sonny, both those things are happening to you." "There must be something in this food that we're allergic to," Violet said. "My goodness," Mr. Poe said, watching a hive on Violet's arm grow to the size of a hard-boiled egg. "Just take deep breaths," Captain Sham said, scarcely looking up from his cheeseburger. "I feel terrible," Violet said, and Sonny began to wail. "I think we should go home and lie down, Mr. Poe." "Just lean back in your chair," Captain Sham said sharply. "There's no reason to leave when we're in the middle of lunch." "Why, Captain Sham," Mr. Poe said, "the children are quite ill. Violet is right. Come now, I'll pay the bill and we'll take the children home." No, Violet said quickly. "We'll get a taxi. You two stay here and take care of all the details." Captain Sham gave Violet a sharp look. "I wouldn't dream of leaving you all alone," he said in a dark voice. "Well, there's a lot of paperwork to go over," Mr. Poe said. He glanced at his meal, and the Baudelaires could see that he was not too eager to leave the restaurant and care for the sick children. "We won't be leaving them alone for long." "Our allergies are fairly mild," Violet said, truthfully, scratching at one of her hives. She stood up and led her swollen-tongued siblings away to the front door. "We'll just lie down for an hour or two while you have a relaxing lunch. When you have signed all the papers, Captain Sham, you can just come and retrieve us." Captain Sham's one visible eye grew as shiny as Violet had ever seen it. "I'll do that," he replied. "I'll come and retrieve you very, very soon." "Goodbye, children," Mr. Poe said. "I hope you feel better soon. You know, Captain Sham, there is someone at the bank who has terrible allergies. Why, I remember one day—" "Leaving so soon?" Larry asked the 3 children as they buttoned up their coats. Outside, the wind was blowing harder, and it had started to drizzle as Hurricane Herman got closer and closer to Lake Lachrymose. But even so, the 3 children were eager to leave the anxious clown, and not just because the garish restaurant, the word garish here means filled with balloons, neon lights, and obnoxious waiters, was filled with balloons, neon lights, and obnoxious waiters. The Baudelaires knew that they had invented just a little bit of time for themselves, and they had to use every second of it. All right, Chapter 8. When someone's tongue swells up due to an allergic reaction, it is often difficult to understand what they are saying. Blah, 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 Klaus said, as the three children got out of the taxi and headed towards the peeling white door of Aunt Josephine's house. I don't understand what you're saying, Violet said, scratching at a hive on her neck that was the exact shape of the state of Minnesota. Blah, 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 Klaus repeated, or perhaps he was saying something else. I haven't the faintest idea. Never mind, Violet said, opening the door and ushering her siblings inside. Now you have the time you need to figure out whatever it is that you're figuring out. Blah, 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 Klaus Blood. I still can't understand you, Violet said. She took Sunny's coat off, and then her own, and dropped them both on the floor. Normally, of course, one should hang up one's coat on a hook or in a closet, but itchy hives are very irritating and tend to make one abandon such matters. I'm going to assume, Klaus, that you said something in agreement. Now, unless you need us to help you, I'm going to give Sunny and myself a baking soda bath to help with the hives. Blah! Sunny shrieked. She meant to shriek Gans, which meant something along the lines of good, because my hives are driving me crazy. Blah! Klaus said, nodding vigorously, and began hurrying down the hallway. Klaus had not taken off his coat, but it wasn't because of his own irritating allergy condition. It was because he was going someplace cold. When Klaus opened the door of the library, he was surprised at how much had changed. The wind from the approaching hurricane had blown away the last of the window, and the rain had soaked some of Aunt Josephine's comfortable chairs, leaving dark, spreading stains. A few books had fallen from their shelves and blown over to the window, where water had swollen them. There are few sights sadder than a ruined book, but Klaus had no time to be sad. He knew Captain Sham would come and retrieve the Baudelaires as soon as he could, so he had to get right to work. First, he took Aunt Josephine's note from his pocket and placed it on the table, weighing it down with books so it wouldn't blow away in the wind. Then he crossed quickly to the shelves and began to scan the spines of the books, looking for titles. He chose 3: Basic Rules of Grammar and Punctuation, Handbook for Advanced Apostrophe Use, and the correct spelling of every English word that ever existed. Each of the books were thick as a watermelon, and Klaus staggered under the weight of carrying all 3. With a loud thump, he dropped them on the table. Blah, 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 blah. He mumbled to himself and found a pen and got to work. A library is normally a very good place to work in the afternoon, but not if its window has been smashed and there is a hurricane approaching. The wind blew colder and colder, and it rained harder and harder, and the room became more and more unpleasant. But Klaus took no notice of it. He opened all the books and took copious, the word copious here means lots of, notes, stopping every so often to draw a circle around some part of what Aunt Josephine had written. It began to thunder outside, and with each roll of thunder, the entire house shook. But Klaus kept flipping the pages and writing things down. Then, as lightning began to flash outside, he stopped and stared at the note for a long time, frowning intently. Finally, he wrote 2 words at the bottom of Aunt Josephine's note, concentrating so hard as he did so that when Violet and Sunny entered the library and called out his name, he nearly jumped out of his chair. Blah, surprise, blah, he shrieked, his heart pounding and his tongue a bit less swollen. I'm sorry, Violet said. I didn't mean to surprise you. Blah, blah, take a baking soda, blah? He asked. No, Violet replied. We couldn't take a baking soda bath. Aunt Josephine doesn't have any baking soda because she never turns on the oven to bake. We just took a regular bath, but that doesn't matter, Klaus. What have you been doing in this freezing room? Why have you drawn circles all over Aunt Josephine's note? Blood-dying grammar, he replied, gesturing to the books. Blah, Sunny shrieked, which probably meant glah, which meant something along the lines of, why are you wasting valuable time studying grammar? Because, Klaus explained impatiently, I think Josephine left me a message in note. She was miserable and she threw herself out the window, Violet said, shivering in the wind. What other message could there be? There are too many grammatical mistakes in the blah, Klaus said, and Aunt Josephine loved grammar, and she'd never make that many mistakes unless she had a blah reason. So that's what I've been doing, blah, counting up the grammatical mistakes. Blah? Sonny said, which meant something along the lines of, please continue, Klaus. Klaus wiped a few raindrops off his glasses and looked down at his note. Well, we already know that blah first sentence uses the wrong its. I think this was to get our attention, but look at the second blentence. My heart is as cold as Ike, and I find life unbearable. But the correct word is unbearable, Violet said. You told us that already. Blah, I think there's more, Klaus said. My heart is as cold as Ike. Doesn't sound right to me. Remember, Aunt Josephine told us Blah liked to think of her husband someplace very hot. That's true, Violet said, remembering. She said it right there, here in this very room. She said Ike liked the sunshine, and so she imagined him someplace sunny. So I think Aunt Josephine meant cold as ice, Klaus said. Okay, so we have ice and unbearable. So far this doesn't mean anything to me, Violet said. Me neither, Klaus said, but look at blah next part. I know your children may not understand the sad life of a dowager. We don't have any children. That's true, Violet said. I'm not planning to have children until I am considerably older. So why would Aunt Josephine say your children? I think she meant you children. And I looked up dowager in the correct spelling of every English word that ever existed. Why? Violet asked. You already know it's a fancy word for widow. It is a blotchy word for widow, Klaus replied, but it is spelled Dowager. Aunt Josephine added an extra D. Cold as ice, Violet said, counting on her finger. Unbearable. You children and an extra D in dowager? That's not much of a message, Klaus. Let me finish, Klaus said. I discovered even more grammatical errors. When she wrote, or what would have led me to this desperate act, what would have led me, the word act, of course, is spelled with a C. Quake, Sonny shrieked, which meant something about this all is making me dizzy. Me too, Sonny, Violet said, lifting her sister up so she could sit on the table. But let him finish. There are just blah more, Klaus said, holding up 2 fingers. One, she called Captain Sham a kind and honorable man, when she should have said a kind and honorable, she called Captain Sham a kind and honorable man, when she should have said a kind and honorable man. And in the last sentence, Aunt Josephine wrote, please think of me kindly, even though I'd done this terrible thing. But according to the Handbook of Advanced Apostrophe Use, she should have written, even though I've done this terrible thing. But so what, Violet asked. What do all these mistakes mean? Klaus smiled and showed his sister the 2 words he had written at the bottom of the note. Curdled cave, he read out loud. Curdled cave? Curdled veek, Sonny asked, which meant curdled what? Curdled cave, Klaus repeated. If you take all the letters involved in the grammatical mistakes, that's what it spells. Look, C for ice instead of K, U for unbearable instead of unbearable, the extra R in your children instead of you children, the extra D in dowager, LED, for lead instead of leaded, C for act instead of AKT, A for man instead of men, and VE for I've instead of I'd. That's spelled curdled cave. Don't you see? Aunt Josephine knew she was making grammatical errors, and she knew we'd spot them. She was leaving us a message. The message is curdled. A great gust of wind interrupted Klaus as it came through the shadowed window and shook the library as if it were maracas, a word which describes the rattling percussion instrument used in Latin American music. Everything rattled wildly around the library as the wind flew through it. Chairs and footstools flipped over and fell to the floor with their legs in the air. The bookshelves rattled so hard that some of the heaviest books in Aunt Josephine's collection spun off into puddles of rainwater on the floor. And the Baudelaire orphans were jerked violently to the ground as a streak of lightning flashed through the darkening sky. "Let's get out of here," Violet shouted over the noise of the thunder. She grabbed her siblings by the hand. The wind was blowing so hard that the Baudelaires felt as if they were climbing an enormous hill instead of walking to the door of the library. The orphans were quite out of breath by the time they shut the library door behind them and stood shivering in the hallway. "Poor Aunt Josephine," Violet said. "Her library is wrecked." "But I need to go back in there," Klaus said, holding up his note. "We just found out what Aunt Josephine means by Curdled Cave, and we need a library to find out more." "Not that library," Violet pointed out. "All that library had was books on grammar. We need a book on Lake Lachrymose." "Why?" Klaus asked. "Because I'll bet you anything that's where Curdled Cave is," Violet said. "In Lake Lachrymose. Remember she said she knew every island in its waters and every cave on its shores? I bet Curdled Cave is one of those caves." "But why would her secret message be about some cave?" Klaus asked. "You've been so busy figuring out the message," Violet said, "that you don't understand what it means. Aunt Josephine isn't dead. She just wanted people to think she's dead. But she wanted to tell us that she was hiding. We have to find her books on Lake Lachrymose and find out where Curdled Cave is." "But first we have to know where those books are," Klaus said. "She told us she hid them away, remember?" Sunny shrieked something in agreement, but her siblings couldn't hear her over the burst of thunder. "Let's see," Violet said. "Where would you hide something if you didn't want to look at it?" The Baudelaire orphans were quiet as they thought of places that they had hidden things that they did not want to look at. Excuse me. Back when they had lived with their parents in the Baudelaire home. Violet thought of the automatic harmonica she had invented that had made such horrible noises that she had hidden it so she didn't have to think of her failure. Klaus thought of the book on the Franco-Prussian War that was so difficult that he had hidden it so as not to be reminded that he wasn't old enough to read it. And Sunny thought of the piece of stone that was too hard for even her sharpest tooth, and how she had hidden it so her jaw would no longer ache from her many attempts at conquering it. And all three Baudelaires thought of their hiding place they had chosen. "Underneath the bed," Violet said. "Underneath the bed," Klaus agreed. "Seek-a-yeet," Sunny agreed, which, without another word, the three children ran down the hallway to Aunt Josephine's room. Normally it is not polite to go into someone's room without knocking, but you can make an exception if the person is dead or pretending to be dead, and the Baudelaires went right inside. Aunt Josephine's room was similar to the orphans, with a navy blue bedspread on the bed and a pile of tin cans in the corner. There was a small window looking out onto the rain-soaked hill and a pile of new grammar books by the side of the bed that Aunt Josephine had not started reading, and I'm sorry to say, would never read. But the only part of the room that interested the children was underneath the bed, and the three of them knelt down to look there. Aunt Josephine apparently had plenty of things she did not want to look at anymore. Underneath the bed, there were pots and pans, which she didn't want to look at because they reminded her of the stove. There were ugly socks somebody had given her as a gift that were too ugly for the human eye. And the Baudelaires were sad to see a framed photograph of a kind-looking man with a handful of crackers in one hand and his lips pursed as if he were whistling. It was Ike, and the Baudelaires knew that she had placed his photograph there because she was too sad to look at it. But behind one of the biggest pots was a stack of books, and the orphans immediately reached for it. "The Tides of Lake Lachrymose," Violet said, reading the title at the top of the book. "That won't help." "The Bottom of Lake Lachrymose," Klaus said, reading the next one. "That's not useful." "Lachrymose Trout," Violet read. "The History of Damoco's Docks Region," Klaus read. "Ivan Lachrymose, Lake Explorer," Violet read. "How Water is Made," Klaus read. "A Lachrymose Atlas," Violet said. "Atlas, that's perfect!" Klaus cried. "An atlas is a book of maps." There was a flash of lightning outside the window, and it began to rain harder, making a sound on the roof like somebody was dropping marbles on it. Without another word, The Baudelaires opened the atlas and began flipping the pages. They saw map after map of the lake, but they couldn't find Curdled Cave. This book is 478 pages long, Klaus exclaimed, looking at the last page of the atlas. It'll take forever to find Curdled Cave. We don't have forever, Violet said. Captain Sham is probably on his way. Probably on his way here now. Use the index in the back. Look under Curdled. Klaus flipped to the index, which I'm sure you know is an alphabetical list of each thing a book contains and what page it is on. Klaus ran his finger down the list of C words, muttering out loud to himself. Carp Cove, Chartreuse Island, Cloudy Cliffs, Condiment Bay. Curdled Cave, here it is! Curdled Cave, page 104. Quickly, Klaus flipped to the correct page and looked at the detailed map. Curdled Cave, where is it? There it is! Violet pointed a finger at the tiny spot on the map marked Curdled Cave, directly across from Damocos Docks, and just west of the Lavender Lighthouse. Let's go! Go? Klaus said. How will we get across the lake? The fickle fairy will take us, Violet said, pointing at the dotted line on the map. Look, the ferry goes right to the Lavender Lighthouse, and we can walk from there. We're going to walk to Damocos Docks in all this rain? Klaus asked. We don't have any choice, Violet answered. We have to prove that Aunt Josephine is still alive, or else Captain Sham gets us. I just hope she is still, Klaus started to say, but he stopped himself and pointed out the window. Look! Violet and Sunny looked. The window in Aunt Josephine's bedroom looked out onto the hill, and the Baudelaires could see one of the spidery metal stilts that kept Aunt Josephine's house from falling into the lake. But they could also see that the stilt had been badly damaged by the howling storm. There was a large black burn mark, undoubtedly from lightning, and the wind had bent the stilt into an uneasy curve. As the storm raged around them, the orphans watched the stilt struggle to stay attached. Tafka, Sunny shrieked, which meant, we have to get out of here right now. Sunny's right, Violet said. Grab the atlas and let's go. Klaus grabbed a Lachrymose atlas, not wanting to think what would have happened if they were still leafing through the book and had not looked out the window. As the youngsters stood up, the wind rose to a feverish pitch, a phrase which here means it shook the house and sent all three orphans toppling to the floor. Violet fell against one of the bedposts and banged her knee. Klaus fell against a cold radiator and banged his foot, and Sunny fell into a pile of tin cans and banged everything. The whole room seemed to lurch slightly to one side as the orphans staggered back to their feet. Come on, Violet screamed and grabbed Sunny. The orphans scurried out to the hallway and towards the front door. A piece of the ceiling had come off, and rainwater was steadily pouring onto the carpet, splattering the orphans as they ran underneath it. The house gave another lurch, and the children toppled to the floor again. Aunt Josephine's house was starting to slip off the hill. Come on! Violet screamed again, and the orphans stumbled up the tilted hallway to the door, slipping in puddles and on their own frightened feet. Klaus was the first to reach the front door and yanked it open as the house gave another lurch, followed by a horrible, horrible crunching sound. Come on! Violet screamed again, and the Baudelaires crawled out of the door and onto the hill, huddling together in the freezing rain. They were cold, they were frightened, but they had escaped. I have seen many amazing things in my long and troubled life history. I have seen a series of corridors built entirely out of human skulls. I have seen a volcano erupt and send a wall of lava crawling towards a small village. I have seen a woman I loved picked up by an enormous eagle and flown into the high mountain nest. But I still cannot imagine what it was like to watch Aunt Josephine's house topple into Lake Lachrymose. My own research tells me that the children watched in mute amazement as the peeling white door slammed shut and began to crumble. As you might crumple a piece of paper into a ball. I have been told that the children hugged each other even more tightly as they heard the rough, ear-splitting noise of their house breaking loose from the side of the hill. But I cannot tell you how it felt to watch the whole building fall down, 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 and hit the dark, stormy waters of the lake below.